So, like a little bit of Passive House history, back when it was the PHI developing the standard and it came to the US, you could choose to meet the criteria either through using the annual heating demand or the peak heating load criteria. And that peak heating load criteria was set based on how much heat could be through the supply ventilation air. So they kind of generically came up with, here's what we need for supply air, here's how much air movement that is, here's how much heat that can hold given the temperature difference, and that's the heat load for the building. So the idea was you don't have a separate heating system, you put it all in that duct. That's kind of the Passive House ideal. But as Stefan was saying, we're in this situation where most of the US has greater peaks than that compared to the annual energy demand. And so you can compare some place like Seattle where it's cool kind of all the time, but never really, really cold. And a lot of the early projects there were meeting the Passive House requirements based on this peak load. And therefore, they could have done or can do supply air heating pretty easily in Seattle because there's no extreme peak there that they have to deal with. Whereas you come like into the Midwest, there you're going to get these peaks that you just that are going to really increase your loads. And so there are ways to combat that peak, right? We could add more insulation and air tightness and windows and all these things to reduce that. But we get our energy payback from that on the annual demand, not the peak. So there's not a lot of incentive to go in and limit peak energy use, besides maybe some grid factors, reducing system sizing. There are some, but especially once you're in the realm of Passive House, continuing to drive that lower and lower adds a lot of cost that you never see back. So if you look kind of like nationwide at the 2015 and more recent Phius climate specific criteria, almost always the peaks are higher than that it was 3.17 BTUs per foot squared degree Fahrenheit for that peak load criteria. Almost all climates are higher than that in the Phius standard, which means you're going to need supplemental heating and for cooling, it's also supplemental cooling. And so I think it's just something to keep in mind that it becomes really expensive to drive down to where you can meet these in most cases. There's also the humidity point of view, which we were talking to a project team this morning in Austin, Texas, that you're going to have more space conditioning and another system to deal with humidity in something like this, because it's